introduce themselves, and we'll begin with Denise, if you'd want to introduce yourself.
Sure. Thanks, Don. Welcome, everybody. My name's Denise Mina-Graham, and I live here in Columbus, Ohio. I started a loss team in 2014. That was a couple years after my son, Dre, took his life. And we've been operating in Columbus for almost 8 years, believe it or not. The years are just ticking by. I am now a board member and still involved with loss, but no longer employed there. But I am really glad to be here. Miss Amy?
Hi, I'm Amy Zell. I am the Suicide Post-Vention Event Coordinator at Loss Community Services. So I work with Denise all the time. Yay! I am also the co-coordinator for Trumbull County Loss in my own hometown, and my co-coordinator is on here today, Terry Naughton. So yay! Thank you for being here. And I lost my son Tyler in 2009.
Thank you, Amy. Appreciate that. And we had one other presenter today who's unable to participate due to a last-minute personal medical emergency that she had to deal with. And I think our thoughts and prayers are with her as she moves forward and dealing with that personal medical issue. And one of the thoughts I want to share with you, I think is important for all loss team members, is to be able to connect with each other. We are a family of support for each other. And when we are confronted with personal crises of some sort, hopefully we can wrap those with layers of warmth and support, so they're are willing to ask for help and are willing to acknowledge that the help that's offered to them is going to be accepted. So I think as part of the healing process of sustaining and supporting loss teams anytime is being able to promote an atmosphere or a culture of caring for individual loss team members as we move forward. So once again, our thoughts and prayers are with this presenter who's not able to be with us today, but hopefully she'll join us in the near future with other topics and activities. So with that, Amy, I'm going to stop sharing. If you and Denise would want to begin, and Frank Campbell, who's with us as well, the grandfather, father, godfather of all loss teams, will be assisting us as well with his wisdom as he goes forward. Frank, you want to wave and say hi, please?
Happy Mardi Gras.
Thank you, Frank. All right, so I'll stop sharing and turn it over to you, and we'll go from there, Amy and Denise.
Rock and roll. Awesome, Amy. Well, as we said, Amy and I both work, or I used to work anyway, with Loss Community Services in Columbus, Ohio. And we wanted to share some of the things that we did during the thick of COVID, right when it was hitting us, to alter and add new programs and whatnot. And we want to share very honestly about what worked and what didn't work, because there's some things that didn't work. Loss Community Services initially started out as a team that responded to suicides on scene. And then we grew after that and ended up developing a lot of aftercare programs, such as support groups, and now a lot of online stuff too, remembrance events, all kinds of good stuff. So that's just a little bit about loss here in Columbus, Ohio. Next slide, please. There she goes. So we're going to talk about these 6 topics: scene responses and how COVID impacted that, phone follow-ups, warm line, and some online things that we did, both Tuesday gatherings and early bereavement connection and support groups. Next slide, please. Thank you. So we have these laid out in a pretty simplistic way. Each of those topics has its own slide. So for our on-scene response, just to share what we did in Columbus, Ohio, and to put it in perspective, we have on average around, I'm going to say 170 suicides a year. It certainly can be a little lower. We've definitely seen it higher, but just so you know, Columbus, Ohio does have, it's a big population. It's not that our rates are higher. We're pretty much right smack in the middle. but just to have some perspective as we're sharing the changes that we needed to make. First of all, what we did, we communicated a lot with our coroner's office, a lot. We wanted to find out what they were doing, how they were handling things. And we also spoke a lot with a local online, or not online, excuse me, with a local crisis team of mental health professionals. We wanted to see, they sometimes responded to scenes of suicides as well. So we were trying to follow suit with what other people were doing. So we ended up pausing our on-scene work in March of 2020. I know that date is probably rings bells for a lot of people. And what we did, we have a wonderful volunteer coordinator. I don't know if she's on today or not, but she worked really, really hard at connecting with all the volunteers and making sure they still felt connected and engaged. There was a lot of communication with our volunteers, so they understood what was happening. We implemented more phone follow-ups and also a warm line, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. And then we resumed going on scene over the summer. So we spent about, I think it was 17 months of not going on scene, which felt really weird. I don't know about some of you guys, but it was just an odd experience for some of us. So what worked? First of all the communication that we had worked well. I felt like we stayed in touch with our volunteers, we stayed in touch with the coroner's office, and just most importantly, we stayed in touch with our survivors, especially those that are more newly bereaved. We did a lot of phone follow-ups in absence of being able to be on scene. And I'm going to talk more about that on the next slide. We did some anonymous surveys of our volunteers when it came time to consider relaunching, not relaunching, but, reactivating the on-scene visits. We wanted to understand how comfortable our volunteers were going to be with that. We wanted to understand who's vaccinated, who's not, again, anonymous, but just so we had a general idea of how do we navigate this? How are we talking to the coroner's office and making sure they know how we're navigating this? When we did return to going on scenes, we had masks with us. And we continue to do that, but we don't always wear them. We're really taking the survivor's lead and what they're comfortable with, and also law enforcement and the coroner's office, because sometimes they're not wearing masks. Obviously, they're there before us, so we follow their lead. Another thing our volunteer coordinator did was a refresher training. After taking almost 1.5 years off from actually going on scenes, we needed to get everybody back together and do some role plays and do some refresher kind of training. So there was anxiety, I think, with relaunching. It'd been so long since we'd been on call. What did not work? The warm line. I am going to share more about that in another slide. Amy, will you go to the next slide? Here she goes. So our follow-up phone calls. So again, a lot of suicides in Columbus, Ohio, because we're such a large population. When we get notified about a suicide, I generally look at our notification process comes one of 3 ways besides word of mouth. It comes either through the coroner's office and we go on scene, or it comes within a day or 2 from the coroner's office and we make a phone call. Or it comes through a report from the coroner's office and all we have is a mailing address and we send out information. So about 1/3 of the survivors that we interact with kind of bucket them in each of those 3 categories. When we halted the on-scene response, our phone follow-ups increased significantly, as you can probably imagine. So one of the things that we did, again, our volunteer coordinator worked with our volunteers to get far more people engaged with us in that capacity. So it used to be just a couple of the staff made the majority of the follow-up calls, but there were so many to keep track of and to make that we needed to get some key volunteers involved, which we did. And that was a win both in helping the staff, but also in getting the volunteers more engaged in a way they hadn't been engaged before. What we learned, so what did not work, it worked really well, and we're still doing this. But what we learned from it, for some, myself included, making phone calls is actually harder for me personally than being on the scene. Those 2 to 3 minute, 5 minute, whatever it may be, pregnant pauses that you have when you're on a scene is 10 times worse when you're on a phone, and you're kind of, I mean, you can't gauge that as well on the phone. So I personally would rather be on the scene. So that was a piece of what we learned, is that some people were more comfortable going on scenes. We had to develop a clear process and logistics. So again, we had a high volume of calls. What volunteers were getting assigned to make what call? How did we expect those volunteers to follow up with the staff to let us know, are there specific items we should mail out based on your conversation with that new survivor, things like that. So we had to set up a new process very quickly to track all of that. I already mentioned that usually this was a heavy workload for the staff, which is pre-COVID, but we got a lot of volunteers sharing in the weight with us, which was wonderful. Next slide. One other thing that we did, thank you, Amy. One other thing that we did with the phone calls, we actually reached out to all survivors that we had a phone number for, which was hundreds and hundreds, divided it up among all of our volunteers. And it was just, we called it just a COVID check-in. It was just how are you doing? These are weird times. Just wanted to call and say hi and let you know we were thinking about you. We went through 2 rounds of that, and I think that was pretty effective too. So that was another thing that was successful. Another thing we did, we created a warm line. Again, we work closely with the coroner's office and the local crisis response agency. We created a phone number, a document that was given to the survivor from the coroner, and we gave the coroner's investigators talking points. So the thought was, for the newly bereaved, we can't be there, but we have people manning. It's not the same as being on call. It's why we call it a warm line. Manning a phone on the other end. You want to talk to a fellow lost survivor, you call this number, and they can talk with you. What worked was all the volunteer training and the volunteer engagement. That was awesome. And also we used Google Voice. I don't know if anybody else uses Google Voice, but I love it. It's free. So there wasn't a lot of extra financial resources invested in this approach, which is really good, because what did not work, no one used it. We sadly did not get a single phone call. I honestly don't know if that was because there wasn't enough equipping for the coroner's investigators as they handed off this opportunity to survivors to call a fellow survivor. If the documentation that was handed off wasn't clear enough and the survivor didn't understand what the heck they would even be calling us for, I'm not sure what went wrong there. And if we were still in the heavy duty thick of COVID and not able to go on scenes anymore, you can bet that we would have dug deeper into this. But about the time we realized it wasn't working, thankfully, we were able to start going on scenes again. So that's just kind of an overview of 3 of the things that we did, programs that we had in place, and how COVID impacted it, and how we kept volunteers engaged, and most importantly, continued to be that installation of hope to lost survivors. And Amy's got some slides she's also going to share.
Thank you, Denise. So our Tuesday gatherings are a response to COVID. They started on April 7th of 2020. They are on Zoom. They are every Tuesday from 7 to 8 p.m. and every survivor is welcome to them. When we first started off, we had a graphic that went out on Tuesday at 3 o'clock, and everybody knew to watch for it. It would have the link for that evening, and it would have our topic. It was a really great way to get people involved. A lot of people were on social media, so we thought that was a great thing. We started there. What worked with that is that we used volunteer facilitators from other counties. So we encouraged other people to join in with us and share that information. And it meant that one person wasn't solely responsible for that discussion every week. So you want to make sure that you share the wealth with that kind of thing. We have gathering guides that were created for this. The first page is a selection or a reading that the facilitator gets in advance and can go through and read. And the second page is a list of suggested questions. And the facilitators are all trained to make sure that they know that they can adapt that, they can change the questions, they can read the reading as is, or they can explain it their way. But that is a great way to make sure that you don't have that, oh, what are we talking about tonight kind of thing happen. We had an excellent way to capture the data of who attended. We wanted to know who was new to loss when they came to a Tuesday gathering, who was bereaved within a year, how many people we were reaching each week. One of the things that didn't work, we found out after some time, was that if we were using social media as the only point of outreach, we were missing anyone that wasn't on social media. So we changed it. I made that adaptation where we had them register online through our event calendar on our website, which then would increase the people that are actually coming to our website. We wanted to keep it simple though, so we only wanted to have them register one time for the year. So they didn't have to register every week. It's a very nice way to connect without having to say I'm coming or say I'm not coming. It's very open. It's very easy. If you're having a bad week and you just want to connect with someone, you know that your Tuesday gathering group is going to be there. I went back and looked because I was not with Loss in 2020. And I know that some of the things at the beginning were PowerPoint displays. And we have talked as we go through the gathering guides and as we continue. And they did, one of the feedbacks was no PowerPoints. Like, don't educate us during this time. Let us just connect with each other. So even though our gathering guides are an educational piece and have information in them, they feel like they're having a discussion more than they're being talked to. So that was very important feedback from them. What we learned is save those gathering guides, use them again when you can. Don't repeat them too often, but you will have people that will phase in and out, and you know if you're the person runs it when you can reuse a topic. But they also are great for other things. If we had another event where I needed a quick topic, I could print off a gathering guide and anybody could speak to it. We use special quarterly events. Once a quarter, we invite someone to come speak for us or teach an activity. We have done things with the polyvagal theory. We have this awesome one coming up March 8th. I'm going to plug us because I can. On March 8th, our Tuesday gathering at 7 o'clock. Register on our website. Will be Robbie Graham, who will come in and talk about Men Grieve Too. And we are not excluding women on that call because obviously we want to have everybody there. But this is an opportunity for everyone to hear about men's grief. That other learn with that was by having special quarterly events, we could resend it out to Adam H boards. We could resend it out to other organizations, other Ohio prevention and postvention organizations to help increase attendance. So it looks like it's just a cool thing to do and a way to get people together, but it's another marketing tactic. We also changed that method of getting that link to participants. That was a big learn because we were missing those people. I'm having a great time forwarding these slides. It's just one click. We also have an early bereavement connection, which I will affectionately call EBC because that's a lot of words. I personally love this group. It began in January 2021. It is for individuals who have been bereaved within the past 6 months. It is set up every couple, I think there's 4, 1 a quarter, I believe, for 4 weeks. So there's 4 sessions, 2 facilitators run it, and there's a new topic each session. Those topics are impact of suicide on mind and body, emotional impact on suicide loss, self-care for suicide loss, and long-term support after suicide loss. So the topic doesn't change every time. It's those 4 topics, but it's 4 separate sessions to register for. So you don't have to come to every session. You don't have to come to a session that you're not able to. You can pick it up next time if it's still in that 6 months. What works for that is you're serving people at their darkest time. Having people come in when they're in that rawest, deepest part of their grief and being able to connect with you and share how they're feeling will help them keep coming back and keep working on their grief journey because they find that connection and that little bit of hope that we're able to give them. It's Zoom versus in person. If you are a survivor of loss, you, like myself, may have felt that there was no leaving the house in that first 6 months. You did it when you had to, but nobody's going out and seeking help if they have the opportunity to just stay home. And you can literally do this in your pajamas if you want to. There's no judgments. The topics are prepared and presented the same way each time. We have a guide for it. If one of our facilitators couldn't attend, one of the other facilitators could just step right in. And the fact that we don't have to attend all in any order works really well for our people that do attend. So what didn't work, I worked really hard to find something that I thought didn't work. And there are times when that is such a heavy moment. And then you find that you're also scheduled to run support group that night or be a support group facilitator. Make sure you watch for your staff, that you don't have staff doing EDC during the same time they're doing support group. Just a way to watch out for each other and make sure we're doing that self-care we need to do, because some of the staff will just tell you they can handle it. Sometimes you got to handle it for them. And what we learned, we debrief after each session. It's important to just have that moment, even if there was nothing that came up that was a challenge, just to say to each other, hey, great job. Glad you were there. I saw so-and-so loosen up a little and talk a little bit on the second session. That was different than last session. That was wonderful. Whatever you need to share. This is very emotionally challenged because no topic is off limits. In our support groups and in our gatherings, we don't talk about method and we don't talk about scene. During EBC, anything goes. If that's what they need to talk about, that's what we're there for. So we're prepared for that as we go in. And we learn that it needs to continue. It's not something that'll stop if COVID goes away all the way. The other thing is our support groups. So on March 16, 2020, they moved to online. I was not with loss, so I'm going to speak the best I can to this, and then Denise can help me out if there's anything that we need to add. We have 3 facilitators when we do our support groups online. It's a 10-week support group. It's curriculum based. We use Dr. Wolfelt's Understanding Your Suicide Loss. So each week has a topic. It's closed after the second week. We think that's very important that you don't reintroduce people and have that trigger over and over again as you come into the group. We added Zoom ground rules. My favorite part of this is if you ask everybody to turn their mic off or their mic on, then you'll see people reaching for it and ready to talk to you, and like their hand just kind of moves forward and then they take their hand back. So you let the person who's talking finish, and then you can say, hey, was there something you wanted to share? And they'll speak. So I encourage use that mic button as a way to help monitor who has something that they want to say, but maybe someone else jumped in too quickly. Make sure you give everybody that ability to have their space. We kept the books in the hallway. We do provide the books for this program, always, whether it's in person or on Zoom. And during COVID, you could just stop into the building and pick them up at your convenience, and you didn't have to interact with individuals. A really great thing that works on this is the name format. So like right now, my name says Amy Zell on the screen, but if I'm in support group, it says Amy Zell, son Tyler, 2009. That keeps it immediate in what we're looking at, and it helps us focus that that's the loss. So when someone's talking, we can be very clear what loss they had, what is their person's name if we need to use their person's name, which is, it seems like it's so much easier to do in person than it is on Zoom. This is a great help for that. We always log in 15 minutes early for the facilitators. We take a couple minutes after to talk. We all know our rules. So we know who's speaking on which night. We know our lead facilitator is always going to do the group introduction, is always going to close it out at the end. We know that one person is watching the group to see reactions, someone else is manning the chat to make sure everything's okay, and someone's speaking. So it's important to make sure that you have all those bases covered. Same challenge with finding something that didn't work. For some people, it's just not a fit. So we might have people register and then not attend. You have that in person as well. So that's not a bad thing. Some people have a really hard time connecting with other people on Zoom though, or using the technology. Technology can be a challenge for some. What we learned, that it's effective connection. We're seeing the group go through the phases as they change and develop. someone who might be not really talking the first week. I think one of the support groups I was in, we had an individual who didn't talk the first 5 weeks. By the 10th week, she could say her name and her son's name and share things, but the first 4 weeks, she couldn't even say her name. So it's great to see that and know that we're still being effective, even though it's through Zoom. And then training and recruiting facilitators can be challenging during COVID because you just don't have that time to meet with each other. Any questions for me and Denise? And Denise, is there anything you want to add to
No,
what I had?
that was a great overview, Amy. Thank you. If you want to type your questions or shout any out, I know I tried to answer some as they were coming up. What is the curriculum you mentioned? Scott, are you referring to support group or early bereavement connection? Support group, we leverage Dr. Alan Wolfelt's material. We actually run our groups as a closed group, meaning there are specific topics that are it's a 10-week long thing. You can join in the first 2 weeks, but then registration's closed because that group really bonds with each other. There are other more open groups like the AFSP model that a lot of us are familiar with in our community, but we don't do one of those. We do not have anybody, Kara. You're asking about running support groups for youth loss survivors. We did that once. We actually contracted with a mental health professional and had a fellow loss survivor partner with her. And it was challenging to get youth to attend. And so many parents had requested it. I thought we'd be packed, but getting the kids there was a whole nother story. So we have found it's more effective to work with the school bereavement team at a couple other organizations and just help them in whatever way we can as they do things in class actually during the school day. Thank you for sharing that, Terry. That is absolutely the book that's used on Dr. Alan Wolfelt's website.
Denise, for the early bereavement connection, is that a curriculum that you guys developed, or can you purchase that online?
We did develop that. My husband actually did a lot of work on that. I got to give him the credit. We leveraged some of Jack Jordan and Bob Bauer's book. Gosh, what's it called? I can see it. Suicide Loss Survivors. Somebody help me. I can't remember, and nobody's chiming in, so maybe nobody else knows either, but it's by, oh, Amy's looking. Thank you, Amy. We'll post it. So it's a very dense book. We picked 4 topics that were covered in that book and added our own whatever to it that felt appropriate for a 90-minute Zoom after suicide loss. Yes, coping with your grief. And it's the 2nd edition by Bob Bauer and Jack Jordan. And I definitely recommend that book. But like I said, it's very dense. So we use that to create the curriculum. And it looked like there was another question in here. Leah, I posted my question earlier. Instead of doing phone calls after a loss, did you consider doing virtual Zoom? We didn't consider that for no particular reason. I think that's a great idea. Has anybody on this call maybe had success with that? Barb's waving her hand. Barb, can I put you on the spot and ask you to share a little bit about that?
Sure, absolutely. So I'm Barb Brunzell from Lost Team Metro West. We're in Massachusetts. And although I didn't think a Zoom call would work, it actually does. It's certainly not the same as being in person, but we've had a few instances where we had an entire family on the phone on Zoom with myself and a different volunteer. And I would say the challenge of that is that you want to sometimes break off there were children and parents, you kind of want to break off and handle those differently. And certainly we were unable to do that. on the call, but it still was very effective. And we really were able to connect, shockingly. I really didn't expect that. And the other instance was, it's great. I mean, someone mentioned earlier that you sometimes don't want to leave your house or have people in your house. So that's another opportunity for people to be like, okay, yes, I can handle a Zoom call. And then I can get off and that'll be that. And I don't have to have someone come in my home. So that has worked very well. We've had phone calls, we've had texting, all that type of thing, but definitely a couple very positive Zoom experiences.
Denise,
Barb,
I
I see
remember
there's a-
you. I'm sorry. I remember
I
you
see there's a
mentioning.
question there from JoJo. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Or no, what is it? I don't know who it's from.
After initial outreach calls to the survivor. So this was the initial, so we're not doing in-person visits yet. We're still doing virtual. So our contact from the police department called me and they were still at the home, and we decided on a time for us to get together. We exchanged information. I got the email address, phone number, and myself and the mom were in touch trying to figure out the best time for the family. And it was maybe a couple hours later. So I had time to get in touch with my volunteers and get someone who was available to get on with me. So then I sent a link and the family was sitting there on that side of the camera and we were on ours. So it can be done.
That's awesome.
Okay. Because I remember Denise, you were mentioning that the silence on the phone, when you're in person, that 5 minute, that those breaks in silence were really difficult.
Yep.
But when you were in person, you were visual, you could see. But on the phone, there's really no visuals. That's why I asked the question.
I
thought
think
that would
that's
be a good
great.
idea.
It's a great point. And we saw some success with this with our early bereavement connection, but it wasn't immediate. I mean, it could be immediate if the survivor chose to attend immediately. But what Barb's talking about is more personalized by, specifically for that family. And I could totally see where that would work. And I'm so glad to hear about some success with that. And it looks like Frank's raising his hand.
Yes, I just wanted to say I'm really grateful for Barb sharing what they've experienced. When you think about the focus of loss of the active post-vention model, it's really a referral program. That's all it is. People get confused sometimes. They want to know if it's evidence-based. Evidence-based or treatment programs. Loss is not a treatment program. It is a way of shortening the elapsed time between the loss and finding help, hopefully local help, because that's what the L in loss stands for, local outreach to suicide survivors. What I love about the technology being used now during COVID is that we won't let go of it necessarily after COVID. And it may help for a lot of responses that have been very challenging in the past. Now, I'm going to always say that it's incredible, the benefit of being in person in front of folks while the scene is still active, because you provide that installation of hope coming out as a volunteer to be there with, you become the best part of somebody's worst day. And they remember you, and it becomes the installation of hope, but also there's that opportunity for them to come full circle in the future and be a provider of loss. So it's hard to ever say that this is equal to or better, but it sure is better than a phone call because of the visual. And because referral is what we're seeking, seeing another survivor. The one cautionary tale here is not to become the resource. To remember that your role as loss is to make referral as opposed to becoming someone they can Zoom with or do FaceTime with, because then you're really perverting the idea of referral. And then you end up having a much different relationship than what is expected. And what we know about active postvention is that being that referral shortens the elapsed time. But if you become the resource, you put yourself at risk for lots of problems and issues. And I just wanted to point out the model you were using, your vision group, a 10-week model, that was piloted 50 years years ago originally. I mean, Alan, I know, has his model, but that was really what Mort Silverman and others were looking to do, and Jerry Motto and others out in California at the LA. And I see Rick down there. Rick knows very well that Norm Farborough started that psychosocial education model. And many groups have used that model as a starting point, and then it might move into a more open group where people come and gather. But it's kind of like a primer, if you will, a chance for people to come get some information about their coping, kind of in a presentation style, and then it evolves into a little bit of a sharing group. But that opportunity in a few weeks to bond and be able to talk out loud, that's hard not to appreciate if you run groups. I always advocate a closed group because that's what I'm used to. And we do a one-on-one assessment in case there's other issues that need to be resolved that aren't appropriate for the group setting. So it kind of helps not have that group have someone with a personality disorder or someone with an active mental health diagnosis who's decided not to take their medication, and as a result, kind of sidetrack the group. So those are the only caveats I'd say about the open-ended group, but I love the idea of doing some screening just because of the sanctity of the group setting itself. And virtual presents its own share of problems for sure. I'll put the little thing in the chat box, and I thank Tammy for putting the correct link because all I had on the email from them was that text thing. I had no idea how to use a text, a pound, anything. When I see a pound symbol, I go to the scales. So what I put in there was this little teaser about next week, because I'll be doing a Zoom workshop about, so you want to start a loss team. Several of you have said you're in the beginning phases of what you're doing, and there may be some stuff in that presentation that will help you about how to approach a corner, how to talk to stakeholders in your community, and who are the stakeholders. But I just want to say thank you so much for all of you being on here today. It's a great turnout. Look at Maura down there. You know, hello, Dr. Maura. So are you still in Boston area? Let's see, Maura, do you hear me, Dr. Weir? Yeah, are you still in the Boston area? Excellent, excellent. I see so many people on Sketchy. Julie just sent me a thing. She's survived Mardi Gras over in Louisiana, and Barb, of course, was on the phone helping me just recently. So it's so great to see so many of you. And I know that the folks in Texas are really working hard, but I want to encourage you, if you're not already on the listserv, it's free, it's on my website. That's where I have Georgia Tobin post the Lunch and Learns, as well as the national workshop, which is coming up, and Alice is on the call too. So she may want to share some information about that. But I know that I just had to throw those 2 cents in. But thank you, Denise and Amy and Don, for putting this on today. And we certainly wish Sandra could be with us, but I think we can all relate to what a bad toothache might do to our day when it comes to talking and concentrating. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank.
Thanks, Frank. And I want to mention a couple of things real quick, and kind of following up what Barb had said about Zoom. In Lincoln, Lancaster County, here in Nebraska, we have used Zoom for our responses, loss team responses periodically throughout the COVID times, but also been using it as follow-up care as well. So we have found that that can be an effective means of reaching out as well. So I think Zoom and other platforms are going to be something, a part of the way we're doing business as we move forward, and live and learn as we go forward. Denise and Amy has done a great job of their presentations. I certainly appreciate everything they have done in terms of providing this information today. And for those of you who have not yet put your email addresses in, please do that. And also I asked that if you have a lost team website, please put that in as well. I'll kind of pull those together so that we can share those at some point through an email or whatnot, or on Frank's web page, in terms of all the lost team websites are across the country, so we can go visit each other virtually, if you will,
Yes.
and look at the different types of resources that each has. Because loss is all about reaching out and caring for those who have lost someone by suicide, but also taking care of our teams. And we can learn from each other in terms of how we can do our business of caring for those who have lost someone, as well as caring for each other. Sustaining lost teams is all about connecting and reaching out as we go forward, communicating, working at providing lunch and learn sessions. We're working at providing the National Lost Team Conference that we're excited about, looking forward to as the planning goes forward. So please put that in the chat box, if you will. And Alice, if you're free there, I see you, Alice. Thank you for joining us. Alice is spearheading the National Lost Team Conference in the fall. Alice, would you want to chat about that just for a little bit? And you have your mute on. Just thought I'd remind you that the mute is on, and if you want to share, we appreciate that.
Thank you, Don. Good afternoon, everyone, and congratulations to Denise and Amy. Excellent presentation. Again, my name is Alice Jordan Miles. I am spearheading with Denise's help, implementing the first ever statewide Indiana Lost Team Network. It's been a dream of mine for over 15 years, and to finally have it come to fruition, it's just, I don't know, it's just a dream come true. Indiana has been awarded to host the 2022 conference, again, as Don indicated earlier, October 16th through the 18th, here at Purdue University, Fort Wayne. We will have a pre-conference that is, its audience is for on clinicians. And then Don and I are going to talk about even having a post-clinician workshop offering AMSR. We will have 5 tracks: veterans, survivors, lost teams, faith, education / first responders. And the reason why we're offering those various tracks, it's been my experience here in Indiana that each topic or group has special needs, or specific needs, I should say. And I want to make sure that this conference is applicable to all of those who are attending. We are in the process right now of putting together an RFP to send out to individuals who would like to present at the conference. So if be on the lookout. Now that I know that we've captured your email, we will be sending out sending you, number one, the save the date that you can. I ask respectfully if you could send that out to all your social networks, and then secondly, so that when that RFP becomes available, any of you who would like to submit and come to the Hoosier Land of Indiana, and believe me, October is really fun here in Fort Wayne, so I welcome you all. I like to show you some Hoosier hospitality, and if you have any input or would like to contact me, I'll put my email in the chat box. But I look forward to meeting each and every one of you in person. And more importantly, I'm looking forward to learning from all of you as well. But thank you, Don, for the opportunity for speaking. And again, I hope to meet everyone. I hope to meet everyone in Indiana in October. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Alice. Appreciate those words. All right, so is there anyone sitting around the table have a specific question that they might want to ask Amy, Denise, Frank, or myself about your working with your lost teams as we come out of these COVID times, lessons learned as we move forward?
I've got a very specific question. In our area, we are the only one in the entire state state of Wisconsin at this point. We are having a lot of trouble getting law enforcement to buy in. Any suggestions from anyone?
Shocker. I can tell you, Curtis, from an Indiana perspective, you just got to keep on fighting. One of the things I've spent the last 10 years of working with our local corner to share resources with us, to share data, to educate them about the importance and the services that lost teams provide to survivors. But he never wanted to play nicely in the sand. So what I did is I went directly to the the Indiana State Coroners Association, and I was able to present at their conference. And I'll tell you what, my phone didn't stop ringing afterwards. There are some people who were like, oh my God, we need this. You know, my job as a coroner is to go in there, determine the cause of death, and get out of there. And I feel very bad because, well, this is what they've shared with me. They feel really bad because they're not able to provide the services to survivors of suicide loss when you know that suicide grief is like no other grief. So that was the first thing I did. The second thing I did is I connected with our federal order of police. Just go to the top and ask if you could just, be able to present at one of their local meetings, because maybe the person that you have a contact with doesn't want to play nicely in the sand, but other people that are doing the same work value the work that you are offering or the services you are offering, and allow them to decide whether they want to work in collaboration to meet the needs of survivors of suicide loss. So that's how kind of I've circumvented the obstacle of working with our local law enforcement. And then lastly, there's been a few officers who know the work that I do, and when they're on call or there's a suicide that occurs during their shift, they make sure that I know who those survivors are so that we can later provide them with resources, and more importantly, get them connected with a support group of suicide loss survivors. So that has always been a big hurdle for me in Indiana, is that our coroner just didn't want to play nicely in the sand. And I really hung my hat on that for a very long time. But then it was like a eureka moment. It was like, oh my gosh, why don't I just go around him? And believe me, word got back to him and he didn't like it too well, but he also saw that all the other there's 92 coroners in Indiana, and I would say over 50 have reached out and wanting and are just yearning for that information and that partnership.
Okay, that helps.
Curtis, Sharon, you're in Green Bay, right?
Yes.
Have you had any luck talking, don't you have a mobile crisis response team that services the county?
Well, it hasn't, that's part of it. We have the mobile team, however, we're not getting phone calls at all. And
Right,
that's,
right.
I mean, it's just a challenge. We have got a couple police officers that are on board, but because of different things within, job fear, loss of that types of thing. So it's really hard. And then we've had some changes within the local enforcement as well. So trying to get around that, and we've had a lot of interim police and things of this nature. So we've had a lot of transition. So it's been really hard too because of that.
Right. I just wondered if you ever take the head of the mobile crisis team to lunch, you can find out maybe where the Achilles heel is. I do think mobile crisis teams, once they recognize the value of a lost team, are very welcoming, but they have some fear that the mobile crisis team might look like a high-cost service when you provide a free service. So they're a little bit paranoid somebody's going to try to take their rank at the scene. But it might be worth talking to whoever supervises that mobile crisis team, because they're usually the best pairings I've found are the ones like in Colorado where it's a mental health person and a law enforcement person going. And they tend to be much more welcoming about having suicide survivors come along, even though it may not be ruled a suicide at the time. As long as you're presenting yourself as people who respond to sudden and traumatic loss, then you're not treading on the coroner's role to make the determination about manner of death. But what you're navigating is unfortunately what everybody runs into. It took me 10 years to get the team to a scene, and I'm an assistant coroner. So if that gives you any insight into how challenging it can be, I sure agree with you, buddy. It's
Okay.
tough, but I find in Louisiana we got to take everybody to eat. That's what works. And in Ohio, it's bring them cookies. So it's going to be pizza in South Dakota. I think it's different everywhere.
Okay, it helps. Thanks.
Thanks, Curtis, for the question and Frank's response. And I think all of us around the table today will say to you that certainly our relationships with law enforcement, county attorneys, kind of coroners, and so forth is an ongoing process to sustain and maintain as we move forward. I would also suggest to you that as we work with promoting lost teams availability, that we become aware that as lost teams are part of a community, they become part of that culture. That's why it's called local lost teams. And so we find that families will reach out to you and without law enforcement involvement. They may have been 6 months, 6 years away from the loss and moved into your community. And suddenly they find themselves at a point where they would like to have some level of support from a lost team. So I would just mention that to you. Well, as our time is kind of winding down here, we've got just a couple of minutes again. At one point in our conversation today, we had nearly 90 different people from across the country participating. Thank you so much for giving up your lunch hour and providing your time, sharing your time with us. So thank you much. I have put into the chat box where you can access today's recording of the Lunch and Learn at www.nebraskalost.org. So you can have access to that. I also will send out an email to all the participants today with that particular information as well. So again, appreciate your involvement today, and please mark down October 16th, 17th, and 18th for the National Lost Team Conference. More is coming soon. Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.